The Yoga of Love, a lecture by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, founder of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, reprinted from Back to Godhead magazine. Bandhur atmatmanas tasyo yenat mavatmanajitat mana anatmanas tu satrut vivartat mava satruvat. For him who has conquered the mind is the best of friends. But for one who has failed to do so, his very mind will be the greatest enemy. Bhagavad Gita 6.6. The whole purpose of the yoga system is to make the mind our friend. The mind in material contact is our enemy, just like the mind of a person in a drunken condition. In Caitanya Charitamrita, Madhya 20.117, it is said, Krishna Bhuli Se Jiva Anadi Bharimakha Ateva Mayatari Desam Saradukha. Forgetting Krishna, the living entity has been attracted by the Lord's external feature from time immemorial. Therefore, the illusory energy, Maya, gives him all kinds of misery in his material existence. I am a spiritual soul, part and parcel of the Supreme Lord, but as soon as my mind is contaminated I rebel, because I have a little independence. Why shall I serve Krishna, or God? I am God. When this idea is dictated from the mind, my whole situation turns. I come under a false impression, an illusion, and my whole life is spoiled. So we are trying to conquer so many things, empires, and so on, but if we fail to conquer our minds, then even if we conquer an empire we are failures. Our very mind will be our greatest enemy. The purpose of practicing Eightfold Yoga is to control the mind in order to make it a friend in discharging the human mission. Unless the mind is controlled, the practice of yoga is simply a waste of time. It is simply for show. One who cannot control his mind lives always with the greatest enemy, and thus his life and its mission are spoiled. The constitutional position of the living entity is to carry out the order of the superior. As long as one's mind remains an unconquered enemy, one has to serve the dictations of lust, anger, avarice, illusion, and so on. But when the mind is conquered, one voluntarily agrees to abide by the dictation of the personality of Godhead, who is situated within the heart of everyone as the Supersoul, Paramatma. Real yoga practice entails meeting the Paramatma within the heart and then following his dictation. For one who takes to Krishna consciousness directly, perfect surrender to the dictation of the Lord follows automatically. Jitatmana prasantasya paramatma samahita saitosna sukhadukha sutatha manapamanayo. For one who has conquered the mind, the supersoul is already reached, for he has attained tranquility. To such a man happiness and distress, heat and cold, honor and dishonor are all the same. Bhagavad Gita 6.7. Actually, every living entity is intended to abide by the dictation of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is seated in everyone's heart as Paramatma. When the mind is misled by the external energy, one becomes entangled in material activities. Therefore, as soon as one's mind is controlled through one of the yoga systems, one is to be considered as having already reached the destination. One has to abide by superior dictation. When one's mind is fixed on the superior nature, he has no other alternative but to follow the dictation of the Supreme. The mind must admit some superior dictation and follow it. The effect of controlling the mind is that one automatically follows the dictation of the Paramatma or Supersoul. Because this transcendental position is at once achieved by one who is in Krishna consciousness, the devotee of the Lord is unaffected by the dualities of material existence like distress and happiness, cold and heat, and so on. This state is practical samadhi, or absorption in the Supreme. Jnana vinana triptat mekutasto vijitendra yukta iti usayat yogi sama lastrasma kankana. A person is said to be established in self-realization and is called a yogi, or mystic, when he is fully satisfied by virtue of acquired knowledge and realization. Such a person is situated in transcendence and is self-controlled. He sees everything, whether it be pebbles, stones or gold, as the same. Bhagavad Gita 6.8. Book knowledge without realization of the Supreme Truth is useless. In the Padma Purana this is stated as follows. Ata Shri Krishna Namadina Bhav Grahyam Indrayasivan Makhjivadaus Vyam Avasfarati Adano. One can understand the transcendental nature of the name, form, quality and pastimes of Shri Krishna through his materially contaminated senses. Only when one becomes spiritually saturated by transcendental service to the Lord are the transcendental name, form, quality and pastimes of the Lord revealed to him. Padma Purana. This is very important. Now, we accept Krishna as the Supreme Lord. And why do we accept Krishna as the Supreme Lord? Because it is stated in the Vedic literature. The Brahma Samhita, for example, says Isvara Parama Krishna Saksidananda Vigraha. The supreme controller is Krishna, who has an eternal, blissful, spiritual body. Those who are in the modes of passion and ignorance simply imagine the form of God, and when they are confused, they say, "Oh, there is no personal God. The Absolute is impersonal or void." This is frustration. Actually, God has a form. Why not? The Vedanta Sutra says, Janmadi Asayayata. The supreme absolute truth is that from whom or from which everything emanates. Now, we have forms. And not only we but all the different kinds of living entities have forms. Wherefrom have they come? Wherefrom have these forms originated? These are very common sense questions. If God is not a person, then how have his sons become persons? If my father is not a person, how have I become a person? If my father has no form, wherefrom did I get my form? Nonetheless, when people are frustrated, when they see that their bodily form is troublesome, they develop an opposite conception of form and imagine that God must be formless. But the Brahma Samhita says no. God has a form, but his form is eternal, full of knowledge and bliss. Isvara Parama Krishna Saksidananda Vigraha. Sat means eternity, Sit means knowledge, and Ananda means pleasure. So God has a form, but his form is full of pleasure, full of knowledge, and eternal. Now, let's compare our body to God's. Our body is neither eternal nor full of pleasure nor full of knowledge. So our form is clearly different from God's. But as soon as we think of form, we think the form must be like ours. Therefore, we think that since God must be the opposite of us, he must have no form. This is speculation, however, not knowledge. As it is said in the Padma Purana, Atha Shri Krishna Namadina Bhav Grahyumindraye. One cannot understand the form, name, quality, or paraphernalia of God with one's material senses. Our senses are imperfect, so how can we speculate on the Supreme Perfect? It is not possible. Then how is it possible to see him? Sivan Makhai Jividao. If we train our senses, if we purify our senses, those purified senses will help us see God. It is just as if we had cataracts on our eyes. Because our eyes are suffering from cataracts, we cannot see. But this does not mean that there is nothing to be seen, only that we cannot see. Similarly, now we cannot conceive of the form of God, but if our cataracts are removed, we can see him. The Brahma Samhita says, Primanyana Trita Bhakti Vilakanina Santa Sadeva Hridayasu Vilakanti. The devotees whose eyes are anointed with the love of God ointment see God, Krishna, within their hearts 24 hours a day. So we require to purify our senses. Then we'll be able to understand what the form of God is, what the qualities of God are, and what the paraphernalia of God is, and we'll be able to see God in everything. The Vedic literatures are full of references to God's form. For example, it is said that God has no hands or legs, but that he can accept anything you offer. Apani Pado Javano Grahita. Also, it is said that God has no eyes or ears, but that he can see everything and hear everything. So these are apparent contradictions, because whenever we think of someone seeing, we think he must have eyes like ours. This is our material conception. Factually, however, God does have eyes, but his eyes are different from ours. He can see even in the darkness, but we cannot. God can hear also. God is in his kingdom, which is millions and millions of miles away, but if we are whispering something, conspiracy, he can hear it, because he is sitting within us. So, we cannot avoid God's seeing or God's hearing or God's touching. In the Bhagavad Gita, 9.26, Lord Krishna says, Patram puspam phalam toam yomi bhaktya prachati tadaham bhakti uppertamas nami priyatatmana. If one offers me with love and devotion a leaf, a flower, fruit or water, I will accept it. Now, how is he eating? We cannot see him eat, but he is eating. We experience this daily. When we offer Krishna food according to the ritualistic process, we see that the taste of the food changes immediately. This is practical. So God eats, but because he is full in himself, he does not eat like us. If someone offers me a plate of food, I may finish it, but God is not hungry. So when he eats, he leaves the things as they are. Purnasya purnam adya purnam ivavasisyate. God is so full that he can eat all the food that we offer and still it remains as it is. He can eat with his eyes. This is stated in the Brahma Samhita, Angani Yasya Sakalendriya Vrtamanti. Every limb of the body of God has all the potencies of the other limbs. For example, we can see with our eyes, but we cannot eat with our eyes. But if God simply sees the food we have offered, that is his eating. Of course, these things cannot be understood by us at the present moment. Therefore, the Padma Purana says that only when one becomes spiritually saturated by transcendental service to the Lord are the transcendental name, form, qualities and pastimes of the Lord revealed to him. We cannot understand God by our own endeavor, but God can reveal himself to us. Trying to see God by our own efforts is just like trying to see the sun when it is dark outside. If we say, "Oh, I have a very strong flashlight, and I shall search out the sun," we will not be able to see it. But in the morning, when the sun rises out of its own will, we can see it. Similarly, we cannot see God by our own endeavor, because our senses are all imperfect. We have to purify our senses and wait for the time when God will be pleased to reveal himself before us. This is the process of Krishna consciousness. We cannot challenge, "Oh, my dear God, my dear Krishna, you must come before me, I shall see you." No, God is not our order supplier, our servant. When he is pleased with us, we'll see him. So, our yoga process tries to please God, so that he will be revealed to us. That is the real yoga process. Without this process, people are accepting so many nonsensical gods. Because people cannot see God, anybody who says "I am God" is accepted. No one knows who God is. Somebody may say, "I am searching after truth," but he must know what truth is. Otherwise, how will he search out truth? Suppose I want to purchase gold. I must know what gold is, or at least have some experience of it. Otherwise, people will cheat me. So people are being cheated, accepting so many rascals as God, because they do not know what God is. Anyone can come and say, "I am God," and some rascal will accept him as God. The man who says "I am God" is a rascal, and the man who accepts him as God is also a rascal. God cannot be known like this. One has to qualify himself to see God, to understand God. That is Krishna consciousness. Sivan Makhijivadausvayam Avasvaradiada. If we engage ourselves in the service of the Lord, then we'll become qualified to see God. Otherwise, it is not possible. Now, this Bhagavad Gita is the science of Krishna consciousness. No one can become Krishna conscious simply by mundane scholarship. Simply because one has some titles, MA, BA, PhD. That does not mean he'll understand Bhagavad Gita. This is a transcendental science, and one requires different senses to understand it. So one has to purify his senses by rendering service to the Lord. Otherwise, even if one is a great scholar, a doctor or a PhD, he will make mistakes in trying to find out what Krishna is. He will not understand. It is not possible. This is why Krishna appears in the material world as he is. Although he is unborn, Ayopaisan Avyatma, he comes to make us know who God is. But since he is not personally present now, to know him one must be fortunate enough to associate with a person who is in pure Krishna consciousness. A Krishna conscious person has realized knowledge, by the grace of Krishna, because he is satisfied with pure devotional service. So we have to acquire the grace of Krishna. Then we can understand Krishna, then we can see Krishna, then we can talk with Krishna, then we can do everything. Krishna is a person. He is the supreme person. This is the Vedic injunction, Nityo Nityanam Setana Setananam. We are all eternal persons, and God is the supreme eternal person. Now, being encaged within this body, we are meeting birth and death. But actually, we have no birth and death at all, because we are eternal spiritual souls. According to our work, according to our desire, we are transmigrating from one kind of body to another, and another. Yet actually, we have no birth and death. As explained in the Bhagavad Gita 2.20, Najyatmriyatva. The living entity never takes birth, nor does he ever die. Similarly, God is also eternal. Nito Nityanam Setana Setananam. God is the supreme living entity among all living entities, and he is the supreme eternal person among eternal persons. So by practicing Krishna consciousness, by purifying our senses, we can re-establish our eternal relationship with the supreme eternal person, the complete eternal person. Then we will see God. Through realized knowledge, one becomes perfect. Through transcendental knowledge one can remain steady in his convictions, but with mere academic knowledge one can be easily deluded and confused by apparent contradictions. It is the realized soul who is actually self-controlled, because he is surrendered to Krishna. And he is transcendental, because he has nothing to do with mundane scholarship. For him, mundane scholarship and mental speculation, which may be as good as gold to others, are of no greater value than pebbles or stones. Even if one is illiterate, even if he does not know the ABCs, he can realize God, provided he engages himself in submissive, transcendental loving service to God. On the other hand, although one is a very learned scholar, he may not be able to realize God. God is not subject to any material condition because he is the Supreme Spirit. Similarly, the process of realizing God is also not subject to any material condition. It is not true that because one is a poor man he cannot realize God, or because one is a very rich man he shall realize God. No, God is beyond our material conditions. Prabhupada. In the Srimad Bhagavatam 1.26, it is said, Savipum samparo dharmo yato bhaktiradhok sage, that religion is first class which helps one advance his devotional service and love of God. The Bhagavatam does not mention that the Hindu religion is first class or the Christian religion is first class or the Mohammedan religion is first class or some other religion is first class. The Bhagavatam says that religion is first class which helps one advance his devotional service and love of God. That's all. This is the definition of a first class religion. We do not analyze that one religion is first class or that another religion is last class. Of course, there are three qualities in the material world: goodness, passion and ignorance, and religious conceptions are created according to these qualities. But the purpose of religion is to understand God and to learn how to love God. Any religious system, if it teaches one how to love God, is first class. Otherwise, it is useless. One may prosecute his religious principles very rigidly and very nicely, but if his love of God is nil, if his love of matter is simply enhanced, then his religion is no religion. In the same verse, the Bhagavatam says that real religion must be ahayituki and apradahata, without selfish motivation and without any impediment. If we can practice such a system of religious principles, then we'll find that we are happy in all respects. Otherwise there is no possibility of happiness. Savipum samparo dharmo yato bhaktiradhok sage. One of God's names is Adhoksa. Adhoksa means one who conquers all materialistic attempts to be seen. Aksa means direct perception by experimental knowledge, and Ada means unreachable. So we cannot understand God by experimental knowledge. No, we have to learn of Him in a different way, by submissive oral reception of transcendental sound and by the rendering of transcendental loving service. Then we can understand God. So a religious principle is perfect if it teaches us how to develop our love for the Godhead. But our love must be without selfish motive. If I say, I love God because He supplies me very nice things for my sense gratification, that is not love. Real love is without any selfish motive. Ahayituki. We must simply think, God is great. God is my Father. It is my duty to love Him. That's all. No exchange. Oh, God give me my daily bread, therefore I love God. No. God gives daily bread even to the animal, the cats and dogs. God is the Father of everyone, and He supplies food to everyone. So appreciating God because He gives me bread, that is not love. Love is without motive. I must think, even if God does not supply me daily bread, I'll love Him. This is real love. As Caitanya Mahaprabhu says, Aslisya vapado radam pinastu mamadrasanam marmahatam karaduva. O Lord, you may embrace me, or you may trample me down with your feet. Or you may never come before me, so that I become broken-hearted without seeing you. Still, I love you. This is pure love of God. When we come to this stage of loving God, then we'll find ourselves full of pleasure. Just as God is full of pleasure, we'll also be full of pleasure. This is perfection.